Welcome to the Poetry Podcast with A, an Amber Michelle's work production. In this series, The Pop-Up, our mission is to pop up in the community to connect with writers, authors, and poets. Ayah Abdul-Rauf, thank you for joining me on the Poetry Podcast with A. So if you don't know, this series is called The Pop-Up. So in this series on the podcast, we pop up all around the community, talking to writers, authors, poets, and we pop up in a place of their choosing. And so I would love if you could tell us where we're at today and kind of why you chose this place to pop up in.
That's a good question. So we're at RevoCup Town Center, which is one of many RevoCup locations throughout the city. It is the most local to me. And this place opened up shortly before the pandemic, and we really needed a coffee shop around here because there was a Barnes & Noble in this plaza and nothing really else going on. So I picked it because there are a lot of coffee shops around that mean something to me, but this place has held a special place in my creative life in the last few years since they've opened. Done a lot of editing here, and I think during the pandemic it was nice to have a accessible place to come to where people could spread out. And I kind of think of this as like the coffee shop of my adult life.
Yeah, I mean, you walk in, the owner knows you. So is that just because you've been here a lot, like working on your craft?
Yeah, I've been here a lot, and since they opened. So, which I'm probably not the only one.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we had some friends in common. The owner and I, we kind of knew people in common, and talked a lot in the early days when there wasn't a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, even when, not even just you, they seem to know people by name here. And that's like always a type of space. If you're like going to a coffee shop and you're writing, you're like editing, working on things, that's the type of environment you want. Just like people that are kind and know your name when you walk in.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
It has third place vibes.
Yes.
So.
Okay, so the reason why you're here today talking with me is because of your newest release of your book, The Fox and the Stag. We're gonna dive deeper into that a little bit later, but this isn't your first book that you've published before. So kind of tell me like your writing journey, like where you're at now. Like kind of describe yourself as a writer, I guess.
Describe yourself as a writer.
Or an author.
Well, The Fox and the Stag was one of my earliest projects, but I only published it recently. It just took me 17 years to do. So I would say my writing life has been very much like a surging and receding, kind of weaving in between projects. My first novel that I published was called Paint, and I wrote that as an undergrad to kind of, honestly, and I know it sounds corny, but I kind of just wanted to know what the process of self-publishing was like. And I have this story, and I felt like it was easier to edit and print because it was kind of short. So I could do a lot of test prints, and it was cheaper to print. So that was my first to kind of learn the process. And then I spent some years learning screenwriting in my graduate program. And the whole time that I was working on my screenplays, this novel, which I had, took me about
Paint
10
or
years.
Fox and the Stag?
Fox and the Stag.
Okay.
Yeah, I should clarify.
No, it's okay.
Fox and the Stag, I took roughly 10 years to get a decent draft. And then I was working on my screenwriting, and it was kind of just knocking on the back of my head, like, hey, let me out. Like, let me go, And I just ignored it. But I did send it out to traditional publishers, but I think every agency in the continental United States rejected it. So
The Fox and the Stag?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Okay, tell me a little bit about that. Was it just like heartbreaking? Or did you know its potential. Because I mean, it's an amazing book. I told you today, like I read it in a week. Less than 7 days, but like the week I didn't read every day. So yeah, I like gobbled it.
I think that seems, for the people who have read it, that seems a very common experience, that they read it really quickly.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit forceful. I think it was a combination of me being a bit young. I didn't have my master's when I was pitching it, and I wasn't a professor at the time. And so with a cold query, I think it was like a lot of agents told me, you don't have the credibility, or the followers. Honestly, the followers, which is ridiculous because
I've been there.
Exactly. We all know how ridiculous this contradictory fallacy we have for creatives, or we say, you have to iterate the same concept 7 times a week to build a following so that we can get you an audience for your deep, rarefied creative work, which necessitates distance.
It's
social media.
Crazy because there's people that you think, like the influencers on Instagram that are like book authors or authors of books, whatever. You go and buy their book and you're like, what the fuck? How do you have so many followers? Like, it's so bad, but like, it's a different game.
Exactly.
It's
a
just
different game
than it was back in the day. Like when Stephen King was getting published, it was more about the work because there wasn't this social media thing.
Yeah. And publishers are handling books like they're trying to treat them like a ephemeral collectible thing when it's a very rarefied thing. It's like asking an astrophysicist to like, I don't know, like to like post daily tours of observatories. It's like
Will you ever get accustomed to it though? Will you ever try to do it to get a publisher? Are you like, fuck it, no?
I tried it there was a year that I was like, I'm going to do this. That version of myself is my least favorite version of myself.
It's hard. It's hard to not lose yourself in this social game.
It's hard. I deeply admire the people who can do that and still be grounded in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I don't know. I know that I'm going to lose some exposure to my inability to walk that line. But I really just, I cannot walk that line. And just the thought, I mean, trying to explain to my characters what this is, what the algorithm is like trying to explain, it's like trying to explain death to a child who has not known death. It's just so depressing and it deflates me.
Then it's not worth it then. Because I mean, I've been there when I released my like debut book, I was trying to do the social media thing, but I lost myself in it and I completely stopped and I didn't gain any new followers, like the whole thing. And now I'm like kind of in a different path. Like I'm mentally healthier to like take it on and like trying to be active. But it's like, what is it for? I'm like, it's to hopefully get seen and published. But like, other than that, I'm like, I don't want to be on my phone.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like a game you have to play as a writer because it's crazy. It's about the following. And it's like, I have 400 followers right now. Like, you know what I mean?
It's hard though, because the thing I want to tell the publishers is if you want a reader, you're asking for sustained, meaningful attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so when even the people I follow, when they publish a book, it's like, I don't come to you when I have sustained, meaningful attention. I come to you when I want to watch my YouTube video that you've made. So there's kind of a disconnect where, I think what you're doing, meeting people and interviewing people, I could be wrong, but I feel like that will also do a lot in terms of those meaningful connections where it's like, I want to know more about your background and your strength of will from like your podcast, and like just as I've gotten into your content, that's what I want to know about, because I'm getting to know you and these people in the community, whereas I don't know if I feel that way about people I follow far away, or
I see what
I
you're
don't know.
saying. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It's a catch-22.
It really
It's so hard.
is. Okay, so that's kind of, I totally understand that, of like where you are at when you were sending this out to publishers and possibly agents or whatever.
That was part of it.
So when did you start that process? What year was that?
I think it was, okay, we have problems with the memory, but
No, that's okay.
I know that I was doing it shortly after I graduated.
Okay.
So 2017, it was a years-long process of the pitching.
So you were pitching, then it completely took a break, and then you decided to self-publish it.
Yes. And I took the break in part because part of the feedback I was getting from the reps was that your screenwriter, put this aside and go do that. And so, and I mean, I did. I went to USC Film School and I wrote screenplays. So I kind of followed their advice, which taught me story, I think. Like, if there is a weakness in this book, I think it's that it's too much idea, and maybe, and there's a reason for that. But I think going forward, and I don't know that
it
Alan
really
would be
connects at the end.
that,
It connects at the end, though.
It does connect at the end. It
totally
does.
make it's like the last chapter of Alan's Flood is literally that story that you say you don't have, and you do. So I'm just gonna.
It takes patience, is the thing.
Yeah, but it's so interesting leading up to it. It's like almost like it's fantasy. You know what I mean? You're like, wait, what? And then you're like, oh. And that's the best. You kind of need that buildup in a great story. So that's just my opinion. Okay, but we're kind of going off track, which is totally fine. We do that. Sorry. Publishers, love you and we hate you. Let's wrap it up there. But kind of going back to that original question of like how you would describe yourself as a writer. I'm curious of like, is there any like aspect, like just any like one word things that come to your mind of like, this is who I am. But the thing is, I think that might be hard for you is that you're such a diverse type of writer. You are in film, which I would love to hear of, like you said, you write screenplays and things like that. So then you're writing novels, you're into poetry, like there's a lot. So is there anything that kind of comes to your mind though that wraps you up in a whole?
Divided. Yeah. If I had to pick one word.
What type of thing do you like crave to write out of, or is it all just like every day is different?
It's not the medium, but I crave, I'm just really close to particular characters, and whatever way they manifest is, whether it's a screenplay or whatever, I really just crave, I just want to deliver that vision to audience.
So character development is like a huge thing for you.
Yeah, and connection. I want you to feel like whoever I'm writing about is looking through the page and looking at you and is like, no, I see you too.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
So it's not necessarily about what medium of writing it is. It's about the characters that form like in your mind and what they're asking of you, how to get like put out on paper and into the world. That's
and they want different things.
What you think?
I think so. And I mean, Alan's very literary, so he would have to be a novel. But yeah, and maybe thematically, maybe I tend to write about just like, what is childhood? what is it? What is innocence? How do you know when you've lost it? If you lose it really early,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that it was ever there?
Yeah. So, with those concepts, why do you think that those tend to formulate for you? Childhood and these things, like, what about you in like your childhood? Does that play a part of like the way you grew up, or are you just kind of
I think it does.
mm-hmm.
I'm only just in the last couple years starting to unpack all of that, because I remember some parts of it. Some parts of it are really with my characters,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in writing about them that I uncover the other parts of it.
Yeah.
So
Writing's so
it's
healing
related.
like that. Writing can really help you understand your past more than I think sometimes talk therapy, because it's like talk therapy, but you're almost talking to yourself through the writing. You know?
Yeah.
At least that's my experience with
That's a
writing.
good point.
But where did you grow up?
Mostly Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
Kansas and Ohio. I did bounce around a lot between schools and different towns, but Midwest, all Midwest. I didn't go out to the West Coast until, until I was trying to do the Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so was writing kind of in your life throughout your childhood, or did it kind of come to you at a certain time, like later in life?
Honestly, I've always written, even before I knew how to write. I just had that kind of hypergraphic, whatever they call it, fixation with writing. And the adults around me, a lot of them were writers, not fiction writers, but it was modeled for me a lot.
Like who?
My grandfather wrote 80 some odd books.
Wow.
And I just watched him sit and write. He would write all day. It's all he did. It was
That's so
crazy.
beautiful.
Isn't it? And it's one of those things you don't think of, and then you get older and you're like, wow, that is really unique and beautiful.
Do you go through his books and like read them?
I've read some of them, yeah. They're very nonfiction,
Mm-hmm.
fairly dry, but very accurate. He had a very capacious memory.
Okay.
And he could just know everything about a topic and would just write obsessively about it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Did you read a lot then as well? If you were writing a lot, I mean, I'm sure you were reading a lot as a child.
Yeah. Yeah. I started reading almost embarrassingly early. I was reading a lot.
That's so cool. I love hearing that I feel like some of the best writers that I meet are reading as children, like reading as a young child. And like, I have yet to meet someone that's more similar to me, where it was like I was outside in a forest. I didn't really read at all. I was dyslexic. So it took a lot for me to get where I'm at. Just wasn't natural. There was no readers in my house. My mom was a reader, I guess. But it wasn't like read at night. It was more like we sang at night. We didn't read.
But see, that's interesting, because I have met writers like you. And I think writers like you there's some unique things you have that writers who maybe grew up more like me are seriously lacking. There's a musicality to your voice, and you have all the sensory experience to really draw on that most writers are very insecure about secretly. So that's interesting.
I mean, there's writers of all types.
Yeah.
Like everyone's different. But it's cool to hear. I do think that my favorite writers are people that have been honing in on the craft. I mean, your vocabulary and vernacular throughout the book, too. Even just speaking with you, it's very high end. How do you say it?
Bougie.
Yeah, it really is. And I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when did you, or if you do, what are like writing habits that you have or routines that like keep you coming back on the page? Or are you just naturally kind of like your grandfather who like always wrote every single day? Or do you kind of have to get yourself there?
That's a good question. I used to write all the time, and then it went down to 4 to 6 hours a day. But now, especially after my graduate program, I'm trying to deliberately not write so much. My routine now is, I do a little bit of whatever writing in the morning. And for my projects, it's a little weird, but I have to not really quite realize that I'm doing it. So what we'll do is I'll go for a walk, and my different projects have their own playlists. And like most writers, I walk and I listen to the music, and I have the supplies out. And then I kind of just hope that the muse will come out and just kind of do it for me. If I tell him, I'm going to sit down and work on your book today, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. It kind of just happens by accident. So, it's always there. I always carry it with me, and I carry my notes with me so that
just
if
in
the
case.
mood strikes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you ever get one of those impulses, or muse comes to you on a walk and something, you write it down? Then can you come back to it later, though, and work on it? Just to get an idea out?
Yes. We'll just do pictures. I'll get the pictures, and then I'll take a few notes. And I found that if I just take a second to, imagine the picture and look at the note, then I put it away, then I can usually recall it. And I'll be honest, I always pray that I'll remember to. I do say a little prayer.
Oh, that's
I always say,
good.
Please, God, help me remember this. Oh, please, God, please help me remember how he felt when da-da-da-da happened. Or, help me remember that she said this thing when she saw his car, because I'm so scared that it's going to go away.
And it will. I've had that happen to me so many times, especially those ones that are in the middle of the night, those surges. And I'm like, oh, I just don't want to go and get my pen. I'll remember in the morning. Don't remember. But maybe I can pray about it.
That's what I've been doing.
And it works.
Sometimes it does. Yeah, I think it does. And the other problem is, once you write it down, you have to think about it to write it down. And then sometimes that kind of ruins it a little bit.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
Yeah, I've just been kind of begging the powers that be to help me remember it. Because
you don't remember it. Even if you do take a note and write it down, it's not the same as when it actually hits.
Yeah.
It's
like trying to take a picture as you're going down a roller coaster. You're trying to take a picture of the scenery, mm-hmm. but it's going by so fast, and you just have to hope,
it turns out.
I hope I can go down this hill again.
Yeah.
Let me access this thing later.
I know, and if you wait too long to go back to it, it's gone forever.
Yeah.
It's really sad when that happens. It's happened to me multiple times.
That sucks.
Okay, so you kind of mentioned your grandfather, but is there any type of person or inspiration that you look to? Nature, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a person, but any type of sense of place that gives you inspiration?
Yeah, I know it's corny, but I think Kansas does, because it's so blank, and the air here is so heavy, and we're at such a low elevation. And I didn't realize until I left, but something about
left California,
or left here.
Oh.
For California, which is a very inspiring place. But when I was there, and I'm making a film about this now, trying to explain this, but this place Kansas is so, it makes me feel like I'm a little bit tranquilized all of the time. It feels like I'm walking through mud here. It's so deeply and profoundly unstimulating to me that I think actually I do my best work here. Because you
have to really dig for it.
Yeah, because it pushes me in to myself. It crushes me until I'm in there. So I think Kansas inspires me. And, the other thing was my mom. You mentioned my grandpa, but my mom was reading to me from the womb. Mm-hmm. So I have to give credit, where credit's due. She read to me a lot. And
when she was pregnant, she read to you?
she read to me when she was pregnant, when I was born.
Oh.
So I think that
Was there a certain like story that she would read over and over, or was it always just random stuff? Was it stuff she was reading, or was it children's books?
everything in the library, it was everything. I mean, yeah. I mean, sure, Dr. Seuss,
Yeah.
but there was not really a particular one. It was just a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up writing a couple kids' books because I think she just
Aw.
likes children's literature. Is the
Yeah.
thing.
So she was reading children's literature to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's really sweet. I want to be that mom. I really do. Would you say there has been a moment that like you as a writer has been the proudest moment that you've had?
The proudest moment that I've had. I think when I got Alan to write that opening chapter for The Fox and the Stag, that was probably it. Because once that prologue was done, I was like, okay, I'm going to be able to publish this thing and live with myself.
Totally. So that this is like a good kind of segue into talking about The Fox and the Stag. And just for people that have been listening, if we've brought up Alan's name in this podcast before, this is the main protagonist in your book, The Fox and the Stag. So the first time I read something of yours, I know we were talking before about like we've probably crossed paths before in like a workshop or two, like over the years, but nothing that's been like actual published work that we've like read of each other's, you know? So this was my first time really reading your work, and it was the piece that you had in the newspaper, The Object, the first issue. And it was an interview with your characters. So like when you say characters are so important to you, it's because you treat them like they're living outside of the ink in the page in the book. You treat them like they're real people in your life. Like it's almost like an imaginary friend, but not an imaginary friend. They're real.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting as an author. You were interviewing your characters and they were responding. They knew they were in this object, the newspaper. And they're like, wait, what? What's going on? And so I was like, wow, this is really freaking creative. I've never read something like that before. So I really wanted to get your book and read it. And people just were talking so highly of this new book. So I was like, I have to. So I got the book and then I read that prologue. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what's in the object. Like she's continuing with this theme. It's like who you are as a writer is like these characters that are living real lives. And it was so interesting. I've just never been able to, I've never had anything that I've read like that before. How did you come up with that? Like that kind of process?
Honestly, I mean, I met Alan when I was 14. I had a vision of this person, and I've just been living with this person since then. I think it's a really deeply metaphysical question, and it's one that used to give me a lot of angst, existential problems, because I don't understand it.
How old was he?
He turned 14, so we're very close in age. We're only about like 6.5 months apart.
Okay.
So
what was that first vision like that you had of him?
He was walking away from a place that he hated and felt trapped to a place that he hated and felt trapped. And it was just he was walking in a crosswalk, but I was like, oh, he's walking away from a place he can't stand to a place he can't stand. And there's no other place he can turn. And he thinks that it's his fault that he's stuck in this path. And I wanted to be like, I guess I was half asleep. So my thought was, I need to tell this person, this is not your fault. And so that was, oh, I'm going to write a short story. And then it was, oh, I'm going to write this. And then it was like, okay, well, I wrote a draft of a novel. Cool. Maybe I'm a novelist. And then I rewrote that for the next 7, however many years. And then when I got into film, that's when, that's when the jig was up, because Roger has always known that he isn't real. And I kind of...
So Roger is the brother of Alan.
Roger's Alan's older brother.
And when you say he knows it's not real, what's not real?
His life.
Alan's life or Roger's life.
They're both of their lives, who they are.
Yeah. He's more like the person in the story that's like...
He's a voice inside me that, when you hear a voice in your head, like your conscience. He's kind of a part of my conscience. He's always been there. He knows me. He knows my life. And I felt I always felt an awkwardness in my early writing, because whenever I'd write about this character, he'd behave in a very affected way. Like he's trying, he'd behave some kind of way, like he's in a play or something. And it just, but once I started learning filmmaking and I had the camera, I was able to start exploring the fourth wall. And I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers your question. The truth is, I don't know. I don't know why I'm like this. Or I don't know.
Like how this thing came into your conscious, and like the reason why these characters kind of break down the fourth wall. It just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
It just is. I think someday we'll understand, when we know more about people and how they think and how they... and there's all kinds of, I don't know, maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know.
So how would you describe the genre of this book?
Either a mystery or maybe coming of age.
Okay. I can definitely see mystery and coming of age. And also when I read it, I thought it was going to be a fantasy book because of Luna. So there is a little fantasy, I think, but it's not fantasy. It's not fantasy. It just like alluded to it. But I'm also not really a fantasy reader. So like I don't have like a ton of experience with fantasy novels, but I was like, I think it is.
Yeah, I used to call it a fantasy novel.
You did?
When I was writing it. Yeah, but it doesn't have... Then I got into reading fantasy, and I was like, oh, if I was a fantasy reader, I wouldn't want to characterize it this way. And then sometimes I think it's a horror novel. This would be another reason maybe why the agents didn't want it. I think it's a little hard to pin down.
Well, you really just needed to get to the ending.
That's the thing. It's the ending. It's all in the ending.
Yeah, that's like really what makes it be like, oh, like... You understand Roger. You understand Alan. And before that, it's just like you kind of just got to trust the author and keep going. You know what I mean? But it was so fun. It just takes you on a ride, But I think my favorite chapter was probably Alan's Flood, just because it really did connect the dots. And there's something about the struggle that they're going through that is just so relatable to a lot of people in life, of like the tragedy that's happening with the drugs and the alcohol and the like sexual assaults. Like that really touches, I think, a lot of people's hearts, because it's just the world we live in. It's just really real.
It is.
And everyone can relate to those things in some way, unfortunately. But before, it's like you don't really know why. It's almost like, I'm not giving anything away, but those themes at the end of the book that come and kind of connect the dots, it's like, oh, when you're dealing with trauma, you can really block things out and put yourself in a different world. So like... Yeah. That's kind of what it did for me, is like, oh yeah, like when very traumatic things happen, you can make a whole new world for yourself. And I feel like that's almost what Alan was kind of doing, but I'm curious if that's kind of what you meant through that.
Yeah. And that's why I really wanted the characters to bookend it in their own words, because even in my process of writing it, Roger was throwing up walls to me. You know, they were throwing up walls at me. So that's why it took so long, because it was a matter of me learning about myself, me learning what they were suppressing in their own lives, and then also understanding why they're putting up these walls. That if I'm trying to get to a certain part, I mean, Alan's Blood is also my favorite chapter, but it took a long time to get there.
Yeah.
Because it's just like Roger says, like, you're not going to look in the eyes of someone you love and tell them, oh yeah, this, and that happened to me. So even though it's a little pedestrian and kind of Luna, like the fantasy world in the novel there's something sort of clunky and naive about it. Mm-hmm. It's not fully fleshed out. It's kind of...
But that's how memory is.
That's how memory is. And this is how kids think of the world. They connect these strange phenomenon of the adult world that are all equally risky. They don't understand the difference between a tax return and an affidavit or a court date. It's all the same. Mm-hmm. And it's just mushed together. So, and even talking about this, and this was another reason why, I mean, I didn't publish it for a long time, because I would not know what it was about. And so I went to therapy to kind of address this, because someone asked me, what's it about? And I was like, I don't know, because it was so traumatic to even think about it that it would just be gone. Or I would work on it for several hours and then not remember what I had done that day, which, you know, it's moving to me when you say these things are relatable. This is the world we live in, because for a long time, I heard the voice I don't want to hear from others, which is, this isn't relatable. No one gets this. It's like someone telling me, you're not accessible. You're not real. Like, your pain is too much. That's how I always felt in trying to workshop this. And I put this novel through so many freaking workshops. So I set it aside for like an extra 7 years, because I was like, okay, no one relates. And then I'm an adult living in the world, and I'm like, no, I think people do suffer, actually.
Yeah, it's true. And another thing is, like, you're saying it took so long to write. Did it? What is time? Really? Like, it came out right at the right time. You know, I think so. And there's nothing, I haven't heard a bad thing about it. So I think that you saying the prologue in this book is the proudest moment you've had in your writing career so far completely makes sense. Because if I was you, I would have to say something about this book, because it's just like living now. It's actually living. It must feel so good to get it out.
God.
What about like the title and the cover art? What was that process? Like, how did you come to that? Because like, you've had words for so long, but packaging it, how did that come about?
That was another one of those overwhelming things, because I'd been thinking about it for so long. As far as the title went, for most of its life, it was called Cope Syndrome. And then in therapy, I was discussing putting this out, because I had dated someone that understood me a little too well and was like, whatever this book is that you mentioned, I think you really need to get it out. Like, it's messing you up. Sorry, I don't know what this is rated, but
anything.
So I went, in my therapy, and I was like, I think if I can change the title, I can start to work on publishing it, because then every time I'm working on it, I don't have to say I'm working on Cope Syndrome, because that was so
almost like
intense.
triggering.
It was triggering, honestly.
Yeah.
So the title just one morning came to me. I saw a fox. I saw a stag. I was like, perfect. And then, I was like, who's who? And then I thought, well, we'll let them decide. The cover, it was easy. I had in my head several covers that I wanted to maybe do. And one of them was
Okay,
that fox photo, which I already had the rights to. So
it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Here it is. It's a beautiful cover. It really stands out. It really, really does.
Well, I mean, I can't take credit for the photo.
I know, but it's your vision. So you can take credit. I mean, I didn't fully draw my cover, but I take credit of it because it was what I said I wanted. You know, like, even if you didn't actually press the camera trigger or you know what I mean? This came because of you. And just like also the way like the horns on the fox, it's those little details. Those horns are kind of throughout the book too. Kind of what do they separate from, like going from Earth to Luna?
Yeah, there's a portion where it's a little hard to follow Roger and Alan's separate timelines because they're both in Luna, which I think is one of the more it's one of the more difficult parts of the book to navigate. And so I was kind of hoping that the antlers would help people along a little bit.
So it's helping the antlers help you, the horns, antlers, of course.
Horns, antlers. Yeah.
Antlers are way better. We're going with antlers. I'm not saying horns ever fucking again. They decipher between Alan's world and Roger's world.
Yes. Which for most of the book is the real world
and
Luna until...
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was able to follow along on that. Between...
Thank God.
I think especially, this might be in chapter 2, but don't quote me on that. But when he is in the aquarium at the zoo or with the polar bear.
Yeah.
That's really when it's like, oh, water is what transfers between going to Luna and Earth. So that was pretty early on, you know, that like, you're like, oh, okay. So
see, I think readers are so much more sophisticated than we get them credit for, because I workshopped this damn thing so many times. And I think when we're in editor's mind, we overthink it, and everyone's telling me no one's going to follow this, no one's going to follow that. But so far,
and I'm not that smart.
Understood it.
And I'm not that smart.
I mean, you're pretty smart.
I'm saying
you did write a book.
Trust me, everyone, I'm not that smart, and I followed along. I swear. But so it really has taken a lot of gumption, it sounds like, to get this out. What does that feel like? Like, do you have any advice or words of kind of like affirmation of this type of gumption that it takes to get something of this magnitude out? Because it's a big book, you know, like it's maybe just about 400 pages or a little over. Yeah, 400.
Yeah. There were two big things that helped. One was I thought about all the things that I'd read and watched that I loved, that I knew were super, super flawed, but were just good enough to really inspire me to make more of my own stuff.
What were those?
Well, the TV series Bates Motel, for example, or some of Sonia Hartnett's earlier novels.
Okay.
I love her novels, but sometimes when an artist does something very new and different, there's just no way to do it perfectly because there's not a lot of models. And so I thought, if I publish it and it's bad, but it's different, people might read it and not love it, but it will inspire them to write more. And then I win. The other thought was, I met someone, I was working on something else for Roger, and it was really good. And I thought, like, what am I going to do with this thing? This 400, it's just sitting on me. It's just sitting. I feel like I'm on the edge of a cliff every time I think about it. And the edge of that cliff is getting closer to me all the time. And someone told me, instead of changing it again, because you've been working on it for more than a decade, think of it like a little boat and just put a little candle in the boat and put a little note at the front saying, hey, I wrote this when I was younger and I was learning what it meant to be a writer.
Mm.
And just let people know, like, just be honest. Just say, hey, this is what this is to me. And then put it out there.
So it's almost like there was a little bit of fear of you being like, I love this storyline, but I wrote it when I was so young and I've learned so much since then that I feel like if I could rewrite this and it could be almost better, but it's like, no, done is perfect.
Yeah. And
kind of that feeling.
Yeah. And I couldn't change it it had to be, there's a fundamental naivete to this novel. That's very married to Alan's perspective when he was 13, 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
That if I add my sophistication and my fancy education and whatever, it's going to ruin it. If I were to write, I couldn't write this book now.
Yeah.
So I have to honor that. And I couldn't wait any long. I mean, I was getting worse migraines, and I mean, it was messing with me. Like, I hate to say it.
Okay.
But it was really weighing on me.
Wow.
That it wasn't out there, because I thought, what if there's that one person that needs it? I know they're not going to find it anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And what if I die and it's just sitting on me? Like, what's Alan's going to have to go find another real person to go and hunt?
Try to jump into their minds.
Yeah, or however this process works. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so amazing that it's out and it's here. It really is. So when you have a very unique ability for your characters, we've kind of talked about that, of like how your characters develop not just in a story inside the novel, but inside you. That's kind of like where they start. They're developing inside of you. Like, you see visions of them, literally. But also, something that probably was like the number one thing that stood out to me in this book was the dialogue. There's so much dialogue, and it just this quick keeps the story moving. I think that's why I read it so quick. I don't know if I read it quick, but depends who you ask. There's like people on the internet now like, I read 500 pages in 2 hours. I'm like, what the fuck?
I didn't enjoy it.
Anyway, I think I relatively read this really quickly is because you move along so quick in your dialogue. And I've been kind of studying that, of like how dialogue, and it needs to be like that. You don't dress up the words when they don't need to be, because that's not how we talk. So I would love to hear a little bit of like how you kind of gain that skill of dialogue and pushing that story forward so much.
Thanks. It's actually something I always get asked about, is my dialogue. I just think that, honestly, most dialogue that I read just really, it sucks. I get really frustrated. I just listen to how people talk. I mean, we don't talk like that. We don't explain things. We don't step them out, and you have to think about how well the characters know each other. Alan and Roger living alone in this little dark house, being young and male and stupid. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're not, they should talk like they know each other really well. So, I mean, honestly, it helps that I just kind of hear them and I hear how they talk. I did also try to implement some rules. So with the narration, especially in the first part, we had 2 sentence structures that we were flipping between. So it was like subject, verb, object, and then it was like subject, object, conjunction, object, and that was it. And then there are points where it breaks. So like on the first page, there's a reference to like Baroque styling. It breaks. All the sentences around that are exactly the same structure over and over.
Mm.
And then in part 2, I break. Part 3, I go back. And then by the time you get to part 5, you shouldn't feel it. I mean, you really shouldn't feel any of it if I did my job right. But I cut out a lot of things. I'm sorry, that's not really good advice. But I would say,
no, I think
tell
that
my
is.
students,
Cut it out.
Cut it out and listen. If you actually listen to people who are close to each other, how they talk. They don't use full sentences.
Mm-hmm.
They just say random things and they emphasize words and they
Like, I love, now that I'm just like kind of reflecting more on it, with you is just even the way that Roger refers to his brother, kid. He says he refers to him as kid a lot. And that's like something that would be so natural that like a brother wouldn't call you your name, Alan.
Yeah,
He's
that'd
not
be
like
weird.
Alan. He's like kid. So that's just a natural thing that I didn't pick up on of like this, how would they speak to each other? And so do you just pick that up just from listening to conversations in your own life, or do you listen to certain things to...
I listen a lot, but I think if I'm going to be honest, because I did start writing this when I was very young, at the time I would read books aloud a lot. And if you read them aloud and the dialogue is overwritten, you do feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It feels weird when you're reading Harry Potter for the 11th time and it's like, no, Harry, we can't do that. It's like, why? How often do you say someone's name?
Yeah.
You know, when you know them really well.
Only when it's like you're angry or like stern.
Yeah. Or you're trying to
serious.
Be like, listen.
Yeah.
Like, listen to me, you know? Then
Yeah.
you say their name. But if you read your work aloud, you'll hear. And as writers, we also have a problem because we have a lot of affection for our names and we want to use the character's name and we like to say it a lot. And we don't realize. But
totally.
Like
and right now I'm realizing we haven't even said each other's names throughout this entire conversation, and we've been talking for 51 minutes. I said your name just in the beginning.
Just to introduce me.
So
that's so true. Like, I'm not sitting here like, well, the thing is, Amber.
Yeah.
Like, or the thing is, Miss A, since we're on a podcast with Ms. A. You know, I don't know.
No, that's such a good point. Such a good point. So I think that's really good advice. And it's actually can relate to writing in general, I think, of reading the work out loud, not even just to dialogue, even though dialogue is especially important to do that. But I just went through doing my audiobook. And
you did a whole audiobook of your book?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm publishing it like the 1 year mark of my book when it's like published, since it's been published, because it was last November that I published it. So like the audiobook's going to come out on its like birthday.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
But when I was going through the process of reading it aloud, I found so many mistakes. There was 3. But still, when you
Feels
find...
like a lot.
Like everyone's going to know.
No one's going
to. But I went and changed them, of course, and re-uploaded the book to where I'm selling the book, you know? So it's like no one has to see those. But it really took a lot of like kind of it was surprising to me that I was like, oh my gosh, reading it out loud is so different, and you find things. So when I put my next piece out there, I'm reading it out loud to make sure it makes sense.
Absolutely. Because our ears, they are smarter than our brains. I mean, we can hear, that's just a dumb statement, but I've already said it to my students, so I have to stand by it now. Our ears can hear 8 times as much as we can see. So we hear 8 octaves, we see only 1 octave. So your ears know, and your heart knows, your gut knows. Like, we do so much up here, our brain is such a limited, there's so little it can do. Mm-hmm. There's so little, it doesn't know anything. It doesn't know anything. It's our heart and our ears that can feel out, okay, that was good.
I love that advice. I'm happy you said it. I didn't know that.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
That's incredible.
I think that's why musicians have such a strong sense of who they are. And writers can get a little insecure because we're in our heads a lot. I mean, you've heard a bad musician who's going up there and they're like really confident and you're like, it's not that great.
I mean, I do that with writers too, though.
That's actually, you're right. That's true. We all do that. Every medium has that.
But maybe like you're right about the insecurity. Like the musicians have like the most confidence. With writers, they're a little bit more insecure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, wow, that's like profound advice, especially for writers that are listening to this that are in that headspace of being trapped.
Yeah.
And not letting the voice get out.
Yeah. And you don't know with writing if it's good or not because it's really hard. Writing is so hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me share with you my favorite line in the book.
Oh, boy.
And it's not even like you're like, wait, how is this your favorite line? But it's just interesting. I mean, I read a lot of words that like I had to look up, and because like I said, I'm not that smart. So I need to learn words. And every single book I read, I learn a new word. It's just it's fun. But this is maybe you can let's see if you can know what chapter this line is. Okay. His mouth was no longer a mouth. It was a throbbing wound.
There's so much happening with Alan's mouth in this novel.
I know. You would think. Okay, actually, I'm going to let you answer. I'm not going to give you any clues away.
I want to say, well, I don't want to spoil it either. I want to say it could be. Oh,
you're stumped.
You know what? I'm going to say I don't know what chapter, but it sounds like it's before he got his wisdom teeth removed, maybe.
What chapter was that?
I think that's the 5th one. No. Oh shit. It could have been the
I mean, we got the book right here.
I know. I might have a copy with me, one of my messed up copies, but
let me just read you the chapters and maybe that will help.
I know the chapters, but it's either Alan's body or Alan's flood. But I'm just trying to
wait.
It's the 5th one.
No, it was in chapter 2.
Unless really.
I wrote it in my notes when I was taking notes for chapter 2. I want to make sure that's right because you're making me think
I remember now.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, that's Alan's wake.
Because they take because of the mycolia and stuff. And that's probably okay. So there's a reason for his mouth to hurt in every chapter. Unfortunately.
Okay, but I thought the description in that was so beautiful. It really stood out to me, and it was early on. You know, that wasn't even my favorite chapter, and it was my favorite line. So
thank you.
I thought that was there. You said Alan's flood though was your favorite chapter. Is there any other favorite pieces in the book?
I like the beginning and I like the ending, and I like the Easter eggs. I have a lot of personal Easter eggs.
Yeah. Well, that was my Easter egg that I really liked.
Thank you.
His mouth.
Yeah. Well, it reminded me, I probably should pay homage, but it's so disturbing. I was reading an essay by a woman who was describing a traumatic experience she had where she was in a lot of pain and she wanted water, but she was so disoriented that she couldn't remember the word for water. So she just kept saying mouth because, and that stuck with me. And now I don't remember her name, so it's a very poor homage, but I want to at least connect that.
So when you read that piece of work, you were thinking her mouth is the wound. And that's kind of how that sentence came about?
Yeah. Or I feel if I read something that resonates with the character I'm writing about, it's almost like if you can imagine that you're a cage, but there's someone inside you trying to like scratch at the bars.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that. Like I can feel them,
yeah,
saying like, yeah, it's that. That's the thing. That's what that was like,
Totally. So I know you said Alan's flood. Is there a piece in here that we could just end on you reading a little bit? Just like a paragraph or something to just like entice us. It could be the prologue because you said that was your proudest moment.
Sure. I think there's a part with the brothers sitting on the couch together that I really like.
Do you know what chapter?
I think so. Hold on, let me just see if I
have it marked or something.
I think I do.
Okay.
Sorry,
I know I'm
so
totally
many copies.
I'm totally putting you on the spot.
I'm so glad
too.
I brought one because this one hopefully there's a few things marked in here.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
it's okay.
I was obviously creeping on you on Instagram, as we do these days. And you were reading a piece from, I think it was the prologue or like the intro. And I was like, I would really love if you could give us a little taste.
Thank you.
With our ears, not our tongue.
I'd love to.
Here, let me hold your mic for you while you read it.
Thank you. Well, this is kind of sad, so maybe I shouldn't do that part.
I know, but just do anything that feels right.
Okay. There's another one up here. There is a paragraph that took me several weeks that I'm very fond of, just because it has a lot of memories in it. If I can find the damn thing. What is this podcast rated?
What do you mean?
I mean, like, what's it rated?
Oh,
like,
it's R.
Oh, it's R.
I mean, the amount of times I cuss, I can't not cuss. So that's just not who I am. So
that's good, though. It's a bad habit. I'm trying to do better with that. Okay.
Being able to cuss more?
Or not cuss less.
Oh, I cuss a lot. And
I do too.
And I just
try not to.
I mean, I've already dropped the F-bomb a couple times.
I didn't even notice. I'm so inured. I'm trying to do it less because I have students now and they're adults, but I don't want them to get in a habit.
I mean, I'm not going to be trying to drop F-bombs once this baby comes out.
That's true.
There's better words.
We have to learn. Okay, this is kind of towards the beginning. So.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for holding that. After eating, the brothers sat in front of the television. The lights were off. Alan looked right and saw a rare phenomenon. Roger's long limbs were folded and calm. His breathing looked soft. He had never been so visible as he was in that fluttering half-light. His eyes were attentive. The pupils gleamed enormous. His nose was pinched and gently freckled. It made him look younger than his age, yet he exuded a quality which suggested the opposite. Alan blinked and turned back to the television. Commercials flashed. Low-fat yogurt, brand new episodes now streaming live. Beat your virus before it beats you. I forgot what we were watching, Alan said. Roger chuckled. A carton of cigarettes sat on the coffee table. He leaned forward to pick one out and paused in the act of lifting it to his mouth. Alan. Alan looked at him. We were watching something. What were we watching, kid? I just said and I don't know.
Okay, want to know what was so interesting in that the piece that you just read due to like our conversation? He said Alan and kid in the same sentence, which is like he was concerned. He was like, that's not something that you would actually think to address him twice, but he was so serious in that moment. Yeah. The dialogue, baby. You got it. It's so beautiful.
That's the first time I was trying to show like they forget shit. Like they don't know what they're watching. And then I think it's soon after that. There's at some point Roger's cigarette, like it's in the scene and then it's not. And then they're like, wait, where did it go? And they can't find it.
Oh my
I don't know if anybody even notices that shit. But I don't know. I'm proud of that moment.
Yeah, no, it's a little like foreshadowing.
I hope so.
Into like the forgetfulness or like the kind of like dreamlike stage that they can get into. Okay. So what would you say, what is next for you? Where can people find this book? Or just kind of like plug yourself a little bit.
Thanks. Well, my website is shethewriter.com. You should be able to find this Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. You can also find it at Basement Books in Liberty, Missouri. And next up, Roger has his memoir. So I've got another fictionalized memoir coming up next, and I'm rewriting some scripts to send out, and I'm putting together a film called Gravel Pit, which will probably be the next thing that I finish, hopefully.
Amazing. That's so exciting. Congrats.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm going to give you a hug while we end.
And baby.
Oh, thank you so so much.
Thank you so much.
That was so fun.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Leave me a review on your favorite listening channel, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. Always with love, A.